Hello, my name's Elizabeth. Let's talk about books. So this is the second in my roundup of books that I've read in 2022. I'll link the first one up here and down here. But basically last year my book review video was an hour long, which is insane. So I'm breaking it up into 5 book chunks. As we go, hopefully I can remember what happened in some of these books if I film these things more I don't even know the word I'm looking for. Let's go. Oh, by the way, here's my book shirt. Tell me what book that is, and I will tell you that I prefer the movies. Don't tell anyone. Okay, I've got my bullet journal here with my notes. Hopefully I'll remember what we're talking about. Let's go with book number 6. Book 6 this year was Burnout, Solve Your Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. They are sisters. One writes other books about sex, I think, and I think that's Emily. This was published in March 2019. I read it in between January and February this year. I picked it up because it was recommended from a podcast that I listened to, which I will link below. It's called On the Reg. It is a podcast by Inga Byrne and Jason Downs, who are academics in Australia, and they often talk about productivity type books. This is one that came up because one of the hosts had a real stress moment, and the other host was talking about this book as an explanation of how stress works, how it affects your bodies, and ways to solve that stress cycle. So you go into like primal panic mode and the things that you can do to resolve the cycle of stress so that you can get on with your life. You're not just living in a constant stressed state. I didn't read it for me. I didn't feel like I was stressed. It was for somebody that I'm close to, and I wanted to help them understand stress, but I knew they wouldn't read the book. So I did learn things about stress. I learned how to solve that stress cycle and how to do things like redefine stresses, how to categorize things so that your brain can cope with them better, and therefore your body will cope with them better. Ultimately though, this book is pitched at women who are in particular parents, and so have that emotional stress, the work stress, running the home stress, managing a relationship stress. And it's basically boils down to take yourself away from the situation, which you can't always, redefine the situation so your brain doesn't think it's stressful anymore, which you can't always, or be nice to yourself, which is not helpful. So it was a decent read. I would recommend it if you are interested in those sorts of things, but I think the takeaways weren't as useful as there could be, and fair enough, because a generic book about stress isn't going to be tailor-made for me or for you. It's just in that genre of how to life. It's going to give you some tips that you might be able to take away. I've written 2 Goodreads stars, which means it was fine. Overall, it was fine, but I don't think it changed my life. Book 7 was Sailing to Sarantium by Gavriel. This was a reread. Originally published in September 1998, and I read it in February. Oh, I hope I'm in focus. Oh, my battery. Okay, let's keep going. I was in the mood for more Gavriel, having read some last year as well. But also I was reading The Bright Ages, review of which is in my previous videos. And The Bright Ages starts out with the mosaic at Ravenna, which is also in this fake Europe that Kay writes about. He writes an alternate historical fantasy world. It's all the one world, it's just alternate to ours. And that mosaic in Ravenna is a key point in the story of Sailing to Sarantium. So it's about this guy who's a mosaicist from living along the Mediterranean. He's summoned to the capital of the empire, Sarantium, which is basically Constantinople, by basically the Emperor Justinian. And so he meets Justinian and Theodora, and is like a country person who's moved to a big city, but also sailing to Sarantium in this world is a metaphor for massive change to your life, which happens here. And so, of course, with Kay, there's a massive cast of characters and they all intersect in ways that are life-changing for them, even if they don't realise it at the time. But the more Kay you read, the more you learn to expect this. There's some things that happen in this book which are alluded to in books that are set in later time periods, which was awesome. And it's a look at Constantinople in the 4th century. Like with all the Kay books, it's a really slow burn and you've got to be really there for the characters rather than the plot, and for the way that the characters interact with each other rather than any epic plot battle or confrontation or anything like that. This one was a reread for me, and the first time I read this book I wasn't inclined to go on to any more, but this time I did. I gave it 4 stars this time, which I think was an upgrade from the previous read I did of it, simply because I'm more in the mood for Kay's type of storytelling than I was when I first read this one. I was more in the mood for like late antiquity, early medieval period of time. Book 8 was the sequel to this, Lord of Emperors, also by Gavriel Kay. It was published in April 28, no, it was published in February 2000, and I read it in February to March 2022. This one I didn't enjoy as much because it has all the characters from the previous book, from Sailing to Sarantium, plus a few new ones. And even though the climax at the end of Sailing to Sarantium, this is the aftermath of that, and that's interesting, I think it was too many people. The ending was too neat. It was a really happily ever after kind of ending, in which the main character of the first one, Crispin, returns home. I don't think that's much of a spoiler to say that he leaves and goes home. So that's weird for Kay to give a character a satisfying to the reader ending. I liked it, and I would definitely, if you liked the first one, do read the second one. It's absolutely not necessary. What have I written in my... Oh, here we go. This one introduces only a few new characters, but the cast was already quite full, and it made for a busy and fast story. It was really fast paced for Kay, which was a bit disconcerting when you are expecting one type of story that you usually get from an author. All the things were happening all the time, but ultimately it's a story about life and living with death, living with the terrible thing that happened but didn't kill you. It's about your impact on the world and the impermanence of your legacy, if you've even made a mark on the world. So they've got 4 Goodreads stars from me. Book 9 was more by Gavriel Kay, and this one was River of Stars. It was published in April 2018, and I listened to it at the same time that I read these other books. So I listened to it February to March this year. It's the sequel to Under Heaven, which I read last year. But it's not really a sequel. It's set in the same part of the world. It's set in Kay's analogue of Asia, China in particular. But whereas the first one was 9th Dynasty China, this one's 12th Dynasty, so it's a long time after. So if you haven't read the first one, if you haven't read Under Heaven, you wouldn't miss much. There's a lot of references back to it, but you don't need them to understand what is happening in this story. This one's about a warrior, not an artist, which was really fun to read at the same time as Lord of Emperors, which is about an artist, a mosaicist. This one is it's different to Kay's other works because he's often about finding the art in the world. Even when he's been writing about warriors, it's always about the beauty of that. What have I put here? It's a solid read and interesting to me in that I know very little of that period of our history. Not knowing that made it easier to immerse myself in the story as a fantasy world rather than an alternate history world. The ending here was really ambiguous. You don't know what happens to Ren Diane, and I really liked that. It really won me over in the end. Like I said, with Lord of Emperors, it was really weird to have a happy, maybe not a happy ending, but a satisfying conclusion. This one is more the style that I expect from Kay, where it's ambiguous about what happens to these characters. That was 3 Goodreads stars from me. It was good. Alright, number 10 was a short story from this collection by James S.A. Corey. These are short stories and novellas in the world of The Expanse. And the last one was the new one that came out with this collection. So it came out on the 15th of March and I read it on the 16th of March. And it is called The Sins of Our Fathers, this short story. It is in the collection Memories Legion, but you can get it individually on Kindle. Alright, I need to preface this before I start that there will be spoilers for The Expanse in this. If you haven't seen The Expanse, please turn off now. I actually gasped aloud when I realised that the main character of this short story was Philip, who is Naomi Nagata's son, and we don't see him for a long time. He's a pivotal character in book 4 and book 5, and then he goes. And although we as audience know that Philip survives the events that are happening, Naomi, his mum, doesn't know, and she has to live with not knowing if her son is alive or not, and if she killed him or not. And I really, really love that, but apparently there was massive fan backlash. So the authors wrote this short story about what happens to Philip after the events of the final book in The Expanse, which is Leviathan Falls, came out late last year. So no spoilers for that, but so I was kind of initially disappointed, but also pleased to see Philip and see what happened to him. I was disappointed to see that it was written in response to fan backlash, because as an audience, we can't dictate what an author writes about their world. We can like it or we can not like it. We can have criticism or we can enjoy it. But we don't get to dictate the art that people make. All we can do is interpret the art and sit with how we feel about it, even if we don't agree with it. So that's my ramble about that. But overall, I've written in my notes, Daniel Abram and Ty Frank, who are the authors behind James S.A. Corey, continue to impress me with their realistic portrayal of the range of human experience and emotion, how people are dealing with the aftermath of the non-spoiler events that happen, but the story is still contained within the context of their life and experience. I didn't need this as a coda to the Expanse series, but I'm so pleased that they wrote it. I'm pleased to have read it. It's given me lots to think about, and my battery is running out. I gave this one 3 Goodreads stars. Thanks for sticking with me for part 2 of this ongoing series, which, I mean, eventually will end because I'll come to the end of the year. Let's talk about books down in the comments, and there will be more of these coming throughout the year, so subscribe to see more or whatever. Bye.